We've got most of our participants here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Because it's a little hard to see who's got their hand up and so forth. If when we get to the Q&A, it would be great if you could write your question in the chat. Does anybody need help with that? Do you know how to use the chat function on Zoom? If not, you can wave frantically or something, but I don't know if I'll see you, so I'll be trying to moderate the questions, and it would be really helpful if they were in the chat. So I will kick it off here. Well, I'm not going to kick it off. I see Betsy just tuned in, so I was going to ask Betsy for a word of prayer to start our session this morning, please.
Okay. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this technology that enables us to gather together here in this way. Be with us today in our conversations and as we stay connected in this time of Omicron. We pray for all those who are sick with COVID, that they may recover. And we especially pray for the people of Beth Israel Congregation in Texas that experienced a traumatic hostage situation yesterday. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Michael, I can also monitor the chat in terms of the questions.
Okay, great. That'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I'm glad you could do it.
I'm looking for it. I just couldn't. Where's the?
Oh, you're wanting to turn it down?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay, now.
You might want to mute it.
Yeah,
Maybe it's okay.
that would be another housekeeping thing, is if you're not speaking, please mute your screen. The session today kind of flows out of this Liberating Structures for Mission effort that the council's been involved with since last May. Liberating structures is kind of a vague thing. It's kind of hard to explain. But what I'm starting to think of it as is what are the structural foundations we need to build the church, which is part of our mission. So that's the way I'm referring to this. So what do we mean by structures? There are a lot of ways to define that, but for our purposes, I'm talking about the written policies, procedures, and so forth that govern us. So there's three main things: the Constitution, the bylaws, and continuing resolutions. You know, underneath that, there are also policies and procedures. The Constitution creates some problems for us, but not all that many. The Constitution is hard to change. It takes 2 consecutive meetings of the congregation to approve any changes in the Constitution. And right now, there are no big barriers or big obstacles in the Constitution to moving ahead with what we want to do. But I can give you one example. Some of the churches involved in liberating structures have reduced or want to reduce their council size. And right now, we are constrained by Constitution to the size that we have. So if we wanted to change the size and have a little bit more of a streamlined council, we would need to amend the Constitution. The bylaws, is what we're talking about today, requires one congregational meeting to approve. And the bylaws are kind of between, they're not a totally operational guide to how we do things, but they define some key things like some of the roles and responsibilities of the officers and how the committee or the council is structured. Continuing resolutions, on the other hand, are kind of the working guts of what we do. That's where we define all of our committees and the relationships between the committees and the council and so forth. So today we're talking about a proposed amendment to the bylaws. And I'll just review that quickly. I think you might have seen it. What we're really doing here is just changing a designation from something we have called congregational life area coordinators to something we're going to call an at-large council member. And that's the language that does that. It's a very simple change. It's just a designation. The second piece of that we need to pass to amend the bylaws is simply to reflect some later language in the bylaws, that instead of having the agenda for the semi-annual meeting in January include reports of congregational life areas and committee chairs, we're just going to strike that so that we don't have those congregational life area and committee chairs in there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb Cordes, who's going to talk a little bit about how we got here and her reflections on what this change means. Deb?
You want to move back one slide, Michael?
Oops, okay, just a minute.
I think it'll be useful because we're really going back to Vern Rice, Flip Formo, how formal our council was, and the requirement that if you wanted to be on council, you actually ended up being a committee chair. And by virtue of being a committee chair, unless you were in the executive positions, secretary, vice president, treasurer, and president, you also chaired a specific committee. And I'll use worship. I came onto the board as a worship committee chair. And what that meant to me was on Tuesday nights, I had council meetings. Once a month on Monday or Thursday nights, depending on the month, we had worship committee meetings. Any work that needed to be done then thereafter meant more days, more nights. And if there were any subcommittees of the council, it meant more time away from my family. I'm going to let you go down. And so when Pastor Andrew was here, and Barry, I think you may have even been president at that time, we really talked about how burnt out people were getting and that we just didn't have the ability to sustain that really top-heavy involvement in everything that both a committee and a council would be up to. And so we decided that we were going to bifurcate the chair from the committee position. So you could have, and a good example was Anna Miller became worship committee eventually chair. I still stayed on council and worship committee. And then eventually she came back on. So sometimes it worked out that you could do both, but you weren't required to do both. And that, in fact, did take a council change and a bylaw change to make that happen. And that worked well for a number of years because we still had some really super active committees. People were super involved. And then the generation started to change out, and that changed again. And so what we're looking at today, and I'll give you a great example, I'm stewardship chair. I've asked probably 4 years now, 5 years, anybody interested in helping? Not one individual volunteered. And so what happened was I had a title, but I had no committee to tap into. There was nothing that we could coordinate. And so it became a meaningless title. And I think part of what we're doing today is to say, my value is not in representing stewardship. And I can tell you there are this many times, 0, where the council as a whole heard me say, and as a representative of stewardship, blah, 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 never happens. What you hear in council is, what I'm hearing from the congregation is X. And so this truly, I think, this move will more clearly reflect what we're up to today. And it also aligns with the changes from our historic past. Each time we've recognized that there is a need to change, and we've been proactive in doing it. What I like about what we're doing today is we're actually talking holistically in terms of not just that amendment, but what does it mean to the Constitution, the bylaws, and the continuing resolutions. And I think that's a piece we've missed in the past a little bit. We've touched on it, but it's good to have it brought up again. That's it. That's all I got for you today. Michael, you're on mute.
Boy. another view on how the current structure works and some ideas about what the change means would be from James Erickson, who is the property representative on the council and he can talk about what that means and how it's worked. So this, we need that Jeopardy music again now, don't we? We'll get James here in just a second. He's looking at, it looks like he's got it now.
I couldn't find my little picture because there's so many people here. That's good. So I couldn't unmute. Okay. So how did I get to be the property chair? Well, it all started when I decided that it would be a good idea to put solar panels on the roof. And I had a couple of friends who were also interested in that, Steve Solom and Ross Stoley. And so we worked that up, and what we found was that the roof was at its end of life. And so we had to replace the roof. And so then we tried to figure out how to get all that to happen. And so eventually, with some attempts, we tried to get the generosity committee to do something, and we tried to get the council to do something, but it wasn't, it didn't work out. So I was on the nominating committee and I couldn't find a property chair. I called a whole bunch of people and no one wanted the job. So I thought, well, maybe if I took the property chair, I could eventually get solar panels on the roof. And so I became the property chair. And
Maybe someday, but.
Since then, I've learned a lot about the struggles of the property chair. In that, number one, you have to get approval for things from the council. So first, you have to figure out what it is you want to do. So you want to replace a furnace, okay? So then you go off and get bids for the furnace because it's broken. And then you have to bring that to council and they have to approve it. So that means that it takes up a lot of council's time to do that. And since you didn't know that the furnace was going to break, you didn't have it in the budget. So that means the council has to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to fund that. And we have various funds for building maintenance. One of those funds was from the last time we had a big maintenance update that the church fund, and there's some money left in there, but that money was specifically allocated for certain maintenance projects. And it was a long time ago, and not everybody on the council knows specifically what activities were included in that. So one of the things that'd be nice if that fund was made more general, just for building maintenance. And so the first thing that we really worked on was the roof replacement. And we eventually, we spent quite a bit of time. We created a roofing committee and we went out and got bids, and And we had to go to the council, not to the council, to the congregation to get approval to spend the money. And so it's been about a 2-year process to get that in place. And we finally succeeded in getting some bids, and hopefully we'll have the roof replaced in the spring. We couldn't replace it this fall because it's basically the supply chain. The roofers couldn't get the materials. So basically my summary is the way it's currently structured is I believe that council spends way too much time on building maintenance when they could be spending that on other things. And a lot of the people on council aren't on council to deal with building maintenance, but it's thrust upon them. So that's sort of my summation.
Thanks, James. Just a quick follow-up in here. Do you have areas that are under your property area, committees that are under your property area that kind of function on their own? They don't really need to have a relationship with the council?
Well, there's a Monday morning crew, and they're budgeted through the property committee. So when the property committee puts forth a budget, it includes some funds for the property, and it's the same for the lawn dogs. So those two, although they're not part of the property committee, they're budgeted through it, and we kind of talk every once in a while.
What happened was, all it did was eat space.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know where it was.
And it was just.
Okay, we have somebody that needs to mute here, I guess. Okay, thanks, James. Another area, congregational life area, would be the service and advocacy area that Deb Mosby represents right now.
Michael, we have a question in the chat.
Yeah,
Maybe we wanna take
okay.
first.
What are the areas attached to congregational life team? Let me give you a slide here. Go to screen share. This is kind of what the structure looks like right now. So we have 6 congregational life area coordinators: worship, education, stewardship, community life, service and advocacy, and property. Now, this diagram doesn't show all of the things that are listed under those, just the main blocks. Service and advocacy, for example, if I scroll over here. Oh, this is worship, for example. So worship has all these things underneath it. Okay.
Don't know if I'm seeing it, Michael.
Am I still sharing screen?
Yes, you are, but you didn't change what was up on the screen.
I didn't. Oh.
I'm seeing what he's talking about on our screen. Worship and then the sub teams underneath it.
Right.
Okay, good.
Right.
On the main diagram?
No.
Yes, yes.
This
Yeah,
is just the worship area in the main are you all seeing the new mind map that says worship?
No.
Okay, let me go back to the other screen. Now I'm at the overall structure principles that shows the 6 areas.
Yes.
Yes.
Everybody got that now?
Yep.
Yeah, we
Huh,
see.
don't know
Yes.
why that screen share didn't come through for some of you. So anyway, these are the areas that are carved out in the resolutions right now. And under service and advocacy, for example, under that global mission, there's the Tanzanian thing, plus a bunch of other connections. But it includes things like Habitat for Humanity and our food efforts, and even our befrienders goes in there for some reason, I think. So anyway, does that kind of give you a picture of what we're looking
Which,
at here for structure?
Michael, which of these seats are filled on council? Because I think there are some blanks and there are some that are filled in. Could you tell us who those people are?
Well, Barb Burkhart was education. She no longer is. You are worship, correct, Ryan?
Yep.
Deb just said she was stewardess. Community life would be Lee Thornton. Servant advocacy was Deb Mosby. And so really the only one we have
6.
empty right now is education. So when we're talking about changing these designations to at large, we're not talking about any of the constitutional officers like the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and so forth, or the youth representative and young adult representative who are defined in the Constitution. So you can see the size of our council is right now, these 6 positions, plus the 4 executive positions, plus the youth position, plus the pastors who are defined in the Constitution.
Gary, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. So those 6 people, worship, education, stewardship, community life, service and advocacy, and property, are the ones who are council members. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. What happens to the ministry underneath of those people that they're in charge of? Are they, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is how would making these people at large facilitate the ministry of each of those areas?
Do we have a council member that would like to respond to that? You see
Well,
anybody?
so yeah, all right. So as I understand it, Gary, it's not about eliminating these portions from service. What it is it is eliminating the requirement that the lead of worship, education, stewardship, etc., are seated on the council. And
Oh,
that if I mean, nothing's going to change for me as the worship guy. You know, we're going to submit a budget to the, you know, with our budget requirements, because I think if I understand it right, all of these people have a budget, and as I kind of inferred, it was you're seated on the council to kind of make sure that your stuff is taken care of. But yet we could submit funding requests. The council could approve them, much the same as they approve a roof. And then I actually needed the slide, Michael. Help me
I'll get
organize
up
my
there.
thoughts.
Just a minute.
If you could share again. It
Okay.
dropped away, and then I was like, oh no, my crutch. I needed that. So
I'll leave it up.
PowerPoint generation, right? We just
Yeah.
need something to point at. So you know, the way I kind of see it, Gary and et al, is that I would submit my budget to the council, and the council would say, yep, you guys are staying well within the realms on your piano tunings and your Easter flowers, which is an external entity as a whole. But yet, if there was somebody in the congregation that wanted to be on council but didn't necessarily feel like, I want to be in charge of worship and in administering operations of the church, I just kind of want to say in how things go, that there's a barrier right there now for the congregation, that in order to get on council, you have to like take on these responsibilities, and I don't want to do that. You know, conversely, I don't mind being in charge of worship and all of that stuff, but yet maybe being on council is not necessarily the right position for me, and that could be a barrier to someone wanting to be serving on these boards. You know, maybe you don't necessarily feel like you're entitled to an opinion on furnaces. I keep mine running barely at home. So, you know, I'll tell you how to run other ones, you know. It's so that's kind of that I kind of look at it as a barrier in what you feel like you can take on. And so that's kind of where we're coming from with this plan of sorts, is that, you know, are we allowing people who want to be part of the direction of the church but don't have this, and then vice versa? So that's kind of where we're coming from.
go ahead, Gene.
I'd like to
Jean?
speak, please.
Or Deb,
Deb?
did Jean had a follow-up, or Deb, are you up next?
I think we'll go to Deborah right now.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to add in that when I came into the service and advocacy, I was pretty much told that the committees kind of run themselves, and I don't have like a budget or anything that goes with all these committees. For an example, Global Mission includes missionary support, Chinese hospitality house, Tanzanian task force, and Global Mission Institute at Luther Seminary. And the social concerns includes Meals on Wheels, food collection for the food shelf, Bread for the World, Habitat for Humanity, Food for Friends, Growing Through Loss, Lutheran Public Policy Coalition, and Habitat's on there twice. So thank you, Michael, for giving me that good description there. So there's a lot of things cooking over here. And each of these, I've talked to some of the people like BJ who has been doing social concerns. I've talked to her a few times now. And right now there's not much happen over there, because of COVID and because they lost 2 community members and stuff like that. But it seems like this has been going on for a while, that committees have already been taking care of themselves and changing this way we do things. I think it's already happened, and it's just sort of catching up with what's already happened. Thank you.
Now we'll go to Gary and Jean.
Well, I don't know, Gene had a comment here, but I just want to say I'm all for streamlining our structures and the administration of ministry. But the discussion from the council members that have spoken seem to focus more on budget and I know budget and ministry are connected, but more on budget rather than on their authority to get things done. And ministry needs to happen. And it isn't always about money and budgeting, but I know that's important. But so I'm trying to figure out here, because I came into this meeting totally in favor of this, changing this, and now I'm confused. So maybe too much detail has been shared today, and it's a little confusing. But I think the people who will be on council, they'll be at-large members on council. Who does the leadership work of the ministry? I mean, who decides who's leading each ministry team?
Let me kind of take a wider view of this. The change in designation from Congregational Life Area Coordinator to at large is really kind of a simple step that simply removes some confusion about what's going on. The real work of configuring and aligning ministries happens in the continuing resolutions. And the continuing resolutions can be modified or changed by a vote of the council without a vote of the congregation. However, that's pretty much the way we would do it, is to really involve the congregation, at least those people interested in those ministry areas, in how we redo the continuing resolutions. So the whole question of how we empower various ministries to act in our mission is something that needs to be defined in continuing resolution rather than bylaws or constitution. So having adopted this amendment, if we do, the real work of supporting, defining those ministries and so forth happens as we look at the continuing resolutions. Jean?
I'm confused. You're not eliminating 6 members of the council.
Correct.
Are you reducing the size of the council, or are you just saying we will nominate and vote for 6 at-large members?
That's correct.
And they can be, but how do the committees then report to the council? Because the at-large members won't have specific areas of duty.
Well, again, looking at how things are actually happening right now, as you heard from Deb and from other members, it is rare for any of the committee work to be reported to the council through that council representative. It just doesn't happen. When things need to be reported, first of all, why report to the council if you can report to the whole congregation? I'll use the Tanzanian effort as an example. That's under service and advocacy, but there's no reason why Deb Mosby has to report for the Tanzanian effort when Karen and Jim and other people involved in that ministry do so at least annually and on an ongoing basis. When the Tanzanian group needed funding for a vehicle, they didn't go through Deb Mosby to get it to the council. They approached the council directly. So that's what's actually happening. The designation doesn't really work. So in terms of a budget, again, that's an area that we can look at in continuing resolutions or policy and procedure. But the idea would be that, let's use James's example of property. He talked about needing to come to the council for emergency expenses above a certain amount, or a congregation, excuse me. But if we have structured our budget in such a way that that committee is already empowered to act, there's no need to have that extra bureaucratic hassle. And that would be true of any ministry if we can configure it properly through continuing resolutions. And then it becomes a question of how do those individual ministries communicate among themselves and to the congregation, and not look at the council as a channel for that kind of communication, because it ends up with the council being a kind of a micromanager in detail, which is really not the role of the council. One of the churches, in fact, we had her at one of our adult forums, Liz Eide, had talked about how they have taken all of these ministry area people, instead of having them report through a council or whatever, they have a quarterly meeting where all of those ministry efforts get together and share ideas and communicate with each other about what's going on. So that's one example of how that kind of communication can happen. We're just saying that this model of pretending that we can use a hierarchical system and run everything up through the council just isn't the way we've actually functioned. Yes, Jean?
So we're not trying to reduce the number on the council.
Well, we can't reduce the number of council right now because it's defined in the Constitution. If later on it looks like we want to, and it puts us at 12 or 13 members, which is pretty big for a church our size. And it just taps, I mean, we want to keep the energy of people who want to serve on active missions. The council doesn't do much for our mission in the world, really, except set a direction.
Okay.
If later on we decide that we want to move down to 10 or 9 or whatever, we would need to amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, Gary?
Well, I'm just wondering, I suppose I'm talking too much here, but I'm hoping that what this does is makes the council more envisioning a group that envisions ministry and future activity of the congregation, at least propose to the congregation ideas for the direction the church will go, the congregation will go. I hope that's the result of this. And that's what I thought coming into this discussion. And I hope that's still a possibility in all of this.
It's
I'll
very
chime in
much a
real-
possibility.
I was going to chime in quick, Michael,
Okay,
because
sure.
Gary, that's kind of what I see, is that if you're a congregant who wants to have a say in the way it goes, I think one key step that we keep forgetting to say too is that there's still the nominating committee, that we're not going to roll into the June, when we make the elections in January, we're not going to roll into a semi-annual meeting and you're going to stand up and say, I want to be on council that day. Like, there's still going to be kind of a process where we fill out a ballot and fill out seats and intentions are made. We'll have to break down how that goes. But if you're a person who wants to have a voice in the way that the church is going, this is an opportunity for you to have that voice without saying, also, I want to be in charge of the property. because I don't want to be in charge of the property, but yet that's the way onto the council is I have to say I want to be on one of these spots, or, I'm going to go back to being a youth, which I don't know. We can't make that work. That was a joke. Sorry, nobody laughed. I'm trying to lighten it up. Man, didn't work. So that's kind of where, Gary, you're right. You want to talk about the ministry and the way that we're looking at steering the church. And a lot of the council meetings we have are, let's make sure we approve this funding so that we can get to the next funding so that we can talk about the next resolution. And we don't have the opportunity to get into some of those things because we don't have those people that are necessarily on the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Steve.
If I understand it correctly, what you're trying to put in place is a council that deals with policy, but overall budget and long-range planning and visioning. And then the tasks would be done by these other little committees, smaller committees, with the idea of they function like task forces, getting a certain job done. Does that make sense, or does that sound like what you're doing?
Yes. And I would also say, getting back to this question of visioning and values and so forth, right now we're focusing on the structural changes, but guiding that is our mission, vision, and values. And maybe Pastor Betsy, could you talk a little bit about how the liberating structures process has unfolded and what we've learned?
Sure. Why don't you stop the screen share?
Okay.
Last spring, we were invited by the Synod staff to be part of this liberating structures process, and they approached 6 congregations they felt were relatively healthy about helping the congregations get unstuck and take the next steps and really look at the process and the structure and why is it hard for churches to make decisions and actually get things done. And so we've been engaged in this process with Synod staff and a consultant and other churches looking at all of these things. And we have some groups that function really well, like our Monday morning crew and our lawn dogs and things like that. And that really isn't tied into the council the way it is on paper. And then we have so many groups that don't really function. And then we have new groups that come up, like the affordable housing team, that occur because people are passionate about things. And we are wanting to remove some of the barriers and the structures that aren't serving us anymore, so we can get at just what you were saying, Steve, a policy-making body that looks at the future and looks at what is our purpose and our mission and vision and values, and where are we headed and how do we get there, and how do we empower people to do ministry and put an end to things that we're pretending are still in place but really aren't. Does that make sense?
Could you talk a little bit about our effort to define and get input on our values and how that affects the way we structure things?
Sure. At our last, I think it was our last session with all of the congregations, they gave us this huge list of like 100 things, and we each were asked to individually pick 5 that defined who we are as a congregation. And then we came back together as a group. This was a portion of the council members, and put them together. And then we have shared those with various groups in the congregation to get input and feedback. And is this really who we are? And really trying to see who we are in this time and this place. And I don't have the list right in front of me. If you were going to ask me to recite them.
No, that's fine. One of the churches had kind of redefined their structure according to their values. Like I think one of their values was to be welcoming. So they had a number of committees that have been involved in that. We're supposed to have a new member committee, but we don't. And there are other things we do that kind of affect this whole mission of welcoming, inviting people. It's evangelism. It's a lot of things. So anyway, that was, instead of having the 6 congregation life areas we have now, it's just a what if question. We're not planning to do it necessarily, but we have faith, learning, relationship. Help me out, folks. Here we got a couple more.
Loves one.
Caring,
and
generosity.
Right. Those are the 5 areas. So, and we could see how we could maybe not so much restructure in that way, but get these missions together so that the people that are doing, and it happens kind of naturally right now anyway. So the people who are involved in the nutrition areas and reaching out to our community and doing the food shares, that's kind of a natural group. Those people should be sharing their thoughts, their energy, and so forth, rather than being defined by any particular kind of structure. The same way, we got all these people that like to do stuff, like to fix stuff, help stuff, make our place an attractive, welcoming place. All the lawn dogs, the Monday morning crew, and they kind of share things with maybe Habitat for Humanity, people that like to get out there and make physical things happen for the good of the world. So anyway, those values would then help us define where we go. And it would be the council's role to help define and share and get people energized around those values, rather than telling them exactly how they ought to be structured or what they ought to do.
Michael, James has a comment.
Okay.
I would just like to say that when I took the property thing, I negotiated with Peter, and I basically made my position sort of at large. The only difference was that I said I'd go to council meetings, but I was only going to be involved in the property stuff. I wasn't going to be involved in this effort or other council efforts. So I was basically at taking the property and saying that'll be the chair of the property isn't a full-fledged member of council.
And using that as an example, if we were structured properly, James and that whole complex of property stuff could function independently without being on the council. That council position, if it's still open, could be filled by someone with a more of an interest in the broader visioning, planning kinds of things. And James could be accomplishing everything that he has accomplished, and he's done a great job on that role, without necessarily having to show up every second Tuesday for a council meeting. Ann, can you unmute?
Question is, who is going to decide what areas of ministry and what the organization should be, and who is going to ask those people to do those jobs? And just a little history of this. It was in the early 90s that there were several of us on the nominating committee, and we were getting people to serve on the council, but we didn't know, there was no structure as to who was going to do what. And so we actually suggested this structure that we have now. And of course, there's been some changes, but not very many changes. I think we need to kind of look at the whole area of all these things that are under our present structure. And some of them can be eliminated and some of them can be added. So it's nothing that has to be kept.
Absolutely right, Ann. And that's the next step in the process. is for the council, with engagement of all the congregation that want to be involved in looking at those resolutions, which would describe those things. So that's the next step in the process. And even though the council could go ahead and redefine a lot of that stuff anyway without this particular amendment, because a lot of the roles of those committees, whether they exist or they don't exist and so forth, is really something the council can do by resolution. So what I look forward to is a process of getting folks like, or all of you here are interested in this, and all of you will have the chance to be involved in discussions about how we change those resolutions to describe what will work for Prince of Peace. Ann?
Michael, tell us a little bit more about these continuing resolutions.
Okay, just a moment. I'm going to do a screen share again here. I don't know, do you see that slide that says how would we change our continuing resolutions?
No, we don't have a screen share.
Okay, now we have a screen share?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, this just reviews what I was just talking about. We changed the continuing resolutions by vote of the Congregation Council with input from the affected committees teams and focusing on our mission, vision, and values. Let's see. There's one other screen. I wish that I could have shared all of our continuing resolutions right now. I think what I can do is email them out to all of you at some point with emphasis on the particular sections that apply to you. Let me see if I can do another screen share. I'm not going to try it. I've got too far to go with it. Help me refocus on this. Does anybody else have an idea on that? Deb Cordes, are you still with us? Ann, could you kind of rephrase your question again? I kind of lost it while I was off busy hunting for a screen.
I haven't heard of the continuing resolutions. And so I'm really curious as to what they're all about and how they're going to help our congregation organization.
Okay, let me, I'll go back. I think I know which document I want to get now. Is anybody here that's familiar? Dave Severson, are you still with us? Can you talk a little bit about continuing resolutions while I look for that slide?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I think one of the things you get into is basically a communication issue where we have this hierarchy of governance documents. Continuing resolutions ends up being one of them, but how many people in the congregation actually have looked at it, reviewed it, and know it? You know, I think there is an issue of trying to communicate to everybody in the congregation what they actually are. You know, maybe that was developed in council, but maybe it didn't get any further at some time. And some of this is so historic, it goes back so far that, you know, memory is going to be an issue unless you go back to look at it. So I think education about our governing documents is probably part of what we need to do in order to help people understand, what's in there and where they fit. But basically, a constitution is our primary governing documents. The bylaws are secondary. Continuing resolutions are actually tertiary. So it's kind of like down the food chain. And of course, policies ends up being the last thing that really has any authority. And of course, if that's in conflict with anything above it, it doesn't count anyway. So does that help at all, Ann? Okay, you're still muted.
And
Okay, Ann, you're still muted.
I would add to what Dave said. We currently have continuing resolutions, and this one is dated February 5th, 2012, and it spells out more detail the roles of the officers and the duties of each of the congregational life coordinators. It lists committees, and then it lists all these very detailed areas under all of the congregational life areas. And as Dave said, this is sort of down the hierarchy. So continuing resolutions are adopted just like any other kind of council action by a vote of the council.
Do I have
Yep.
a screen share up here right now?
Yes, you do. That's what you've got up.
This is a copy of what is on the church website. It's kind of buried under the council. And it's unfortunately pretty bad text, but you can kind of see it defines the officers of the congregation. If you scroll down a little bit, it defines the congregational life areas of the church. It defines the duties of the congregational life area coordinators. You can see that it says they serve on the congregational council and participate in other activities of the council, and they assume responsibility for promulgating and coordinating programs and activities. Then the committee chairs, the terms of office of committee chairs, the duties of the committee chairs, how they're supposed to report, and then the congregational life area organization. So we've got what the worship committee is supposed to do. There's a whole list of things that the worship committee does: decorations, altar communion, assistants, liturgists, greeters, coffee preparation. And so much of this has happened automatically for so long that, the idea that it needs to be described in writing is just kind of, beside the point. However, there are a lot of things on here that just aren't happening the way they have been described. Now here, for example, adult education, it talks about what they've been doing, and that's pretty much what they've been doing. The stewardship, it's got the duties of the stewardship committee. A lot of that stuff has been happening, but not because we have a functioning stewardship committee. Anyway, this is a document that I can get out to. Well, we will just have to communicate, as Dave says, and make sure that the congregation, and particularly the people that are actively involved in these committee areas, understand what's in there and have ideas on what would work in terms of a continuing resolution that would describe what really they need to do. Is this making sense? Kurt Norberg.
Kurt, you're on mute.
We're not hearing you. It might be your microphone. We're not hearing you, Kurt. Kurt. We're still not hearing you. I think it's your microphone, Kurt. It doesn't show that you're muted, but your microphone might be off. While Kurt is getting his audio back, does anybody else have a question or comment? We are getting close to the end of our time. I'm not sure if we were scheduled for a full hour or not. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'd like to just talk about a couple of logistical things, just so you're aware and a heads up. The agenda for the semi-annual meeting on January 30th calls for consideration of this bylaw amendment. We can introduce it, we can discuss it, but we can't vote on it in January because we will be virtual and an amendment change requires a physical ballot. So we will have to have further discussion, but we will not be, we will have to table the motion until such time as we can get together and vote on a physical ballot. That doesn't mean that the work has to stop on the continuing resolutions or in all of our discussions about how we streamline and focus our efforts to accomplish our missions. And we will have more discussion of that at the semi-annual meeting and some more information coming out prior to that. Any questions about that? I'm seeing a lot of faces that say either I've heard enough or I need another cup of coffee or something like that. So if there are no further comments, I think we will wrap this up. And again, Pastor Betsy, I'd like you to lead us off with prayer.
Why don't we unmute and say the Lord's Prayer together? That's always kind of fun to do. A cacophony of voices.
Shall we get that on video too?
Let us pray.